Well, welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome tonight's speaker. It's Captain Len Stewart. Captain Stewart is the manager for fire communications for Baltimore County, and he has a very busy job with us. Captain Stewart has over 24 years of service with Baltimore County Fire Department and has been a volunteer for even longer, working in Baltimore County, Carroll County, and Harford County. He's been an EMS District Officer, an instructor, an ALS Administrator, and administrators and instructors with the Fire and Rescue Academy. He's working towards completing his Bachelor to Master's degree in Public Safety Administration. And tonight's talk will be on fire communications, radio discipline and etiquette, the do's and don'ts. So welcome, Captain Stewart. And without further ado, I turn over the microphone to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Segal. Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all. I'm going to give you a disclaimer right off the bat. This is my first official WebEx class. I'm used to teaching in person. I'm a hands-on and a see people face up kind of person. I do think this is a great platform. I'm excited to be here tonight. I see some people and some names that go way back with myself and the department, and I see a lot of new faces. So nice to meet everybody. I have a very open class when I teach, so I don't have any very regimented structure in the sense that I like a lot of participation. So a lot of the slides that I'm going to go through tonight, I'm going to ask for your participation, and I hope that you participate. I will call on people just to strike up some conversation if you kind of shy off, because I think it's important to get your opinions and your views to see where you stand before we even start with the content. Once we get through the lecture, my goal is to see what you kind of know, and I'm sure a lot of you know a lot of stuff, and then at the end, make sure we solidify some things. I'm going to apologize in some regards for this, but not too much, because obviously the manager of fire communications, I am the liaison between the 911 center and Baltimore County Fire Department, and I oversee the administrative duty officers and the medical duty officers. One of the intents of this class, and my initial plan was working with one of the fire dispatch supervisors and teaching this, but for some logistical reasons, we wanted to keep this specific. Baltimore County fire dispatchers do an amazing job. 911 dispatchers in general do an amazing job, whether you're with one county or another, and they are truly the pinnacle of why we are and do what we do. The starting point of this lecture is to give you an overview of how Baltimore County works, and then we'll go into the actual radio etiquette part of things. So before I start, does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns, or something they really want to get out of tonight's conversation? As far as breaks, I typically take my breaks based on the consensus I get from the audience, but because many of you aren't on camera, I can't see if you're falling asleep or not. So I'll take my breaks based on the content and the time in which we're at as far as the lecture goes itself. So let's get into the lecture. What I'd like to go over tonight, because we're teaching obviously here in Baltimore County, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Baltimore County demographics and really why we are who we are and why we do what we do. Now, no matter what jurisdiction you're in, you can equate your call volume basically with the statistics and within your jurisdiction. And that's really important to stress, because as with any jurisdiction, when your total tax base increases, your call volume is going to increase. So we're going to talk about Baltimore County demographics. We're going to talk a good bit about the 911 center and how it operates, specifically with Baltimore County, because that's what I know. We'll briefly talk about our fire response for those of you in the room that aren't with Baltimore County. And then we'll start to identify challenges with radio communications. I really want to hone in on the 5 C's of radio communication, discuss effective and ineffective communications, some of the contributory factors, and then we have some cool audio here. Now, again, I'm going to give you another disclaimer. I have audio in here from specifically Baltimore County. I did not put this audio in here to make one person look better than the other, or to suggest that any one dispatcher or any one fire department personnel does a better job than not. They're specifically, the intent is for us to listen to the audio and talk about effective communication, non-effective communication, and how we can honestly improve the system in general, no matter whether you're with Baltimore County or went through another jurisdiction. I see some people in this group that I have an immense amount of respect for, and I'm sure there's others from jurisdictions that I do not recognize. So I would ask that those of you that have some time in the department or retired from the department, any department that has some knowledge, I would love to hear you contribute as much as you possibly can so we can get some good discussion going. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do, I told you we're going to have some group discussion. So this really is kind of gauge you guys to see where you are and how you feel about radio communication. And I think the first question I'm going to ask that's not up here is, where would you gauge how important communication is in the fire service? Is it a little important, somewhat important, or very important? Any volunteers that want to answer that question?
Extremely important.
Okay, can you ad lib on that, sir?
Certainly. Let's just do a medic call. If you do not consult correctly, you're giving bad information to the hospital. If you're not communicating with your partner, forget the radio, you're not communicating with your partner, you could have a bad outcome from that. Somebody could lose their life. And that goes even more so on a fire scene, where if you're not communicating with your crew before you even enter, or if you're not communicating concisely, you could wind up with really bad outcomes.
Excellent. You just hit about 2 or 3 of my questions on the slide in front of me. Anybody
Sorry.
else? No. Don't be sorry. That's exactly what I want. I think that's great. I mean, I think it's important to understand, and I don't want to jump slides, but it's important to understand that radio communication really does, when I say radio communication, understand throughout most of this conversation, effective or non-effective communication really does have a huge, huge factor to play in line of duty deaths and injuries. And we're going to talk about that. Anybody else want some input? I'm going to pick on some people here, and I apologize. Please don't. You can jabber me privately if I pick on you and you don't want to be picked on, but I'm looking here and I see one of our retired deputy chiefs who I have a lot of respect for, Chief Miller. If I could just get your perspective, sir, of how important radio communications are, both from a member that's been around volunteering as well as a chief officer, just to get your input for the group on radio communications. I would appreciate that.
Hate to bake off on this. I'm driving, so I can kind of barely hear you.
Okay. I was asking if you could hear me, if you could give your input on your perspective of radio communications, both as a volunteer and as a retired chief officer and an officer, as far as how important radio communications is and why.
I think communications isn't just limited to radio. I think pretty much everything we do is based off communications. Obviously, it's the total feedback network. Without communications, we really have nothing.
So I want to stress on that in some other slides. I noticed some other people in here that I'm very familiar with that I have a tremendous amount of respect for in their radio etiquette, and I'll call on them a little later. But I want the group to understand what Chief Miller just said, and that loop communications. And the gentleman before him, I'm sorry, your name is AK, but I have you as AK. What is your name, sir, if I may ask?
Ari.
Ari, okay, Ari. Oh, I knew you. Okay.
Yep.
So as Ari said, I mean, it's critical, but because we operate in various different facets, that closed loop communication is important. So if I asked you on a scale from 1 to 10, how important radio communications, what would you say? Anybody? Any hands up? I'll pick on somebody. How about Nikki?
It's definitely a 10.
10. Okay. Was there anybody that disagree with that?
It's a open line of communication that, if you need help, you can ask for it right away and you get it. It's the documentation of the call, if you will, throughout.
That's an excellent point. The documentation of a call. Could you elaborate on that, sir?
Well, in modern days, it's become the statement of what's going on, and now with the IDRs and your BIRs, and you're painting a picture for everyone, and it gives a heads up for incoming units as to what they're coming into. But without it, we would sort of be lost. And I come from a time when we had 2 channels, and that was it. And things can get very confusing. But it's imperative that there's good communication going on. For things can change rapidly on a fire ground or on an EMS call or an MCI or whatever. And without the radio communication, we'd all sort of be lost, coming in and almost starting from square one to figure out what's going on without the heads up and the BIR that you have ahead of other incoming responding units.
That was a very good answer, Rick. So I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, sir, could you give me a little bit of a synopsis about what you did and where you're from, and if that's not too much to ask?
You know,
You
I've
said you
got
used to operate.
51 years in Bachelor Volunteer Fire Company, 34 years retired, Baltimore County as a fire specialist. Member of the hazmat team for 28 years. So been around for a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Rick. I thought that was you, buddy. And for the group, if you could answer my next question, are you aware of? You said you used to operate. We used to operate with 2 channels, and now we obviously have 3 divisions. We have several more channels, but what is your, if you don't mind giving it, your perspective of Baltimore County as a whole? And I'm going to ask in a minute if there's any other jurisdictions out here, so I don't pick on just us. But what's your perspective of Baltimore County as far as our communications? Do you believe that we are going in the right direction? We've kind of plateaued, or if you feel that way, do you think we're going in the wrong direction?
I think as far as radio communication, we're headed in the right direction. It's been an ongoing process. Sometimes I think there's too much chatter on the radio.
Well, that's we're going to discuss that tonight. I'm glad you brought that up. But
particularly, in the coin phrase of retired Deputy Chief Gary Warren, he always called people to get off the combat channel, if you will. And the one thing I find is a detriment is units trying to call en route, and I find myself doing it, that I just go to the divisional and call out. Because if you're on the first alarm assignment, trying to get in, and dispatch is trying to repeat the update, which is the same thing pretty much that you have either on the MDT or on your printout. And I just don't find that necessary. If there's something that changes and it's updated information, that would be different. But when you're putting out the same information that was on the MDT or on your printout, I don't see that necessity.
Rick, you bring up some great points there, and I want you to keep that. If you keep that in your head, because I'm going to come back to you if you don't mind. Is there anyone else in this group that's from another jurisdiction that wants to talk to me a little bit about their jurisdiction before I get into the slide set with Baltimore County? Anybody from Anne Arundel, Howard, PG? Or we got everybody in here from Baltimore County? Okay, fair enough. So I'm gonna assume, unless somebody tells me otherwise, we're all from Baltimore County. So we can keep this somewhat specific to Baltimore County, but if anybody in here is from a different jurisdiction and they want to chime up a little later, I'd appreciate that. So we're going to talk about a lot of things in this lecture set that Rick and Steve and a couple other people brought up. But the first thing I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about Baltimore County. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. These are the most recent statistics that I have. Baltimore County has a population of a little over 847,000 people, and we are growing. We are the 3rd largest county in the state, 3rd to, I believe, Montgomery County and then PG County. After us, if I'm not mistaken, is Howard County. So we're a large jurisdiction, and I think some would say, given the jurisdictional size that we have, we're woefully understaffed and underfunded for a lot of different reasons. It's not really for this lecture, but we will talk about some of that with radio communications. The typical, we have 336,873 housing units with a total of around 300 and some households. And each household at an average is 2.3 people with 9 business communities. Now, the great thing about Baltimore County, I really do think we got our stuff together in a lot of regards, is we operate under one jurisdiction. Although we have volunteering careers separate, we do really function well together for the most part when it comes to operations. And I think that's important to understand. In order for us to do our job, we have to have a 911 center. Now, is there anyone in here familiar with how the 911 center works in the sense of civilian or if they are sworn employees? Anybody want to take a guess that may not know and works in another jurisdiction or is aware of other jurisdictions that have sworn or non-sworn employees? Okay, well, I'll give you the answer. The 911 center here at Baltimore County, they work with civilian employees. Their whole entire staff is civilian with the exception of the fire liaison and the police liaison. We have 2 centers. We have the primary center and we have a backup center. And those of you that know where their centers are, that's great, but we're not going to share that information simply because we obviously don't want to give our locations out for security reasons. They work on landline 911, mobile 911, and they most recently went to last year text 911, so you can actually text 911. They have a non-emergency line that you can call, which is 410-887-2222. And that is, believe it or not, equally utilized. That phone goes off all day long. The 911 center overview as far as call taking, they have civilian staff, as I said before. They operate on any given day with 35 to 40 people per shift. They have 4 shifts with 12-hour shifts, which they refer to as the Pittman schedule. They work 2 days on, 2 days off, 2 days on, 2 days off, 3 days on. And they rotate night and day. So they're 7 to 7 and then 1900 to 7 in the morning. They have their own training academy, so they train their personnel within staff. And this year, or last year's statistics, they dispatched a total of 851,000 calls, a little over, almost 852,000 calls. They dispatched close to 700,000 police calls, 121,000 medical calls, and 37,000-ish fire calls. Sorry, I was getting a little feedback. So I do want to ask the question to anyone in the group. Do you think that the call volume plays into effective or ineffective radio communications? Let me see if I can widen this out. I'm going to pick on somebody. Paul Harmon, if I could pick on you, sir.
He doesn't want to be picked on. I'll say it's ineffective.
But it does both. They get more proficient, but then they get not lazy, but it happens every day, so they lose some of their attentiveness, if you will.
Okay, call volume is significant, and any given time of day they get most of their calls. Anybody want to take a guess on what our highest call volume is in the center? What time frames?
Witching hour.
What's that? The witching hour?
The witching hour, like 2 to 4, 2 to 5.
In the afternoon or in the morning? You're talking about the morning.
In the morning.
Okay. That's when we get some of our crazier calls, but believe it or not, most of our calls come between the hours. From a medical standpoint, most of our call volume is between 9 a.m. and 2300. That's when we average 2/3 of the call volume for any given day. And that's a significant amount of calls. So I want you guys to keep that in mind when we start talking about radio etiquette. Now, this is a source of contention, but this isn't the class for it. We at the 911 Center operates on a set of standards that the 911 Center choose, and that set of standards is called ProQA. They work in 3 separate systems, which is emergency medical dispatch, emergency fire dispatch, and emergency police dispatch. Now, I'm sure everyone within this group is familiar with our Maryland medical protocols as a functioning provider. If a functioning BLS or ALS provider, this is basically, it's not basically, it is for them their same set of protocols. The 911 center must operate with a nationally accredited set of guidelines. This is that set of guidelines. And contrary to what you may or may not believe, ProQA and Clausen is actually one of the premier dispatch systems within the country. We have a computer automated dispatch. Again, not for this room, but we just went in November of 2023 to Motorola's Premier One CAD. And we went from basically an off-the-box shelf, if you will, again, one of the better off-the-box shelves, to from what we used to have as our own homegrown system for about 35 plus years. Now, there was a lot of benefits to that system, but we've come a long way in moving into the 21st century with a new system. The 911 center, as far as the 911 overview, they have 911 call taking. They have 7 to 8 dedicated staff with fire dispatch. Fire dispatchers, as you may or may not know, we have main one. We have the backup channel, which is FD06. So if you hear 2 different voices dispatching calls, that's typically because the call volume is significant, and one dispatcher will dispatch a call followed by another dispatcher dispatching a call. They have a fire dispatch supervisor that sees the overall dispatching of the room. They have an assistant supervisor. They have a dispatcher that works the central talk group, the east talk group, the west talk group, and then takes care of our tactical talk groups. Now, I'm going to ask you a question before we get into the conversation of effective communication or problematic communication. Is anybody willing to take a stab on the busiest part of the day? Let's just say, with the sake of, one incident, maybe 2 incidents going on, how many people you would need to manage that talk groups or those channels based on that information? Anybody want to take a stab on a comfortable level of people that they could manage that room effectively? I don't want to call on anybody because I can't see your faces, but do I have any volunteers? How about?
In the chat, we have a couple of people saying more than 8.
Okay. I'm sorry, I wasn't reading the chat. I apologize, Ash. So more than 8. Okay, so right in the chat, somebody said about more than 8. So I'm gonna share with you a little bit of something, a little bit of how they work and why I focus so heavily on this conversation. Those of us here in fire department, if I have a working incident, I have a separate dispatcher. And then I have 3 divisional talk groups. Now, as a supervisor, that supervisor's role is to basically oversee and help any one of the individual dispatchers, to include that TAC talk group dispatcher. If anybody's out on break, that takes one person down. And if somebody's training, they're training with somebody. So that makes one person basically a half a person, even though they got 2 people at that desk. So they're challenged. And we're going to get back to that when we talk about some of the other communications in the further. So I want you to keep that in the back of your head. As far as the police dispatchers, they operate a little differently than we do. They operate with a total of 13 to 14 dedicated staff. They also have a police dispatch supervisor that oversees the personnel and manages the rooms. And they have an assistant supervisor. But the one thing they do a little differently than we do is they actually monitor. They have 1 dispatch per precinct. So unlike us, if you're a police officer, for example, in Pikesville, you deal with that police dispatcher all day long, and every car within that precinct talks to 1 supervisor or 1 dispatcher. With us, we're dispatched on main 1. We may talk to 1 dispatcher. We go to another divisional talk group. We talk to another dispatcher. If we're dispatched across to another battalion, we talk to another dispatcher. But the police, they're unique in that they have 1 dispatcher that they speak with for most of the day. And then they have an actual relief dispatcher, which is there for when they take breaks and when they actually go out and take their lunches. However, that being said, they also run almost double the calls that we do. So it gets pretty taxing for them. Do we have any questions at this point in time? And Ashley, I apologize. You said the chat, but I'm having some problems with seeing my chat directly. So let me look and see if I can bring that up so I don't have that problem anymore. Nope, can't see my chat. That's okay. I'll ask for your assistance when we get to that point.
I can start reading out some of the comments.
Yeah, would you please when they come? I don't mind since I can't see them. Okay, so basically a dispatch overview. I think everybody in this room, it's fair to say, know how a call gets dispatched. It comes in from 911. It comes in either from a cell phone, a text, or a landline. The call taker will take that call. They will go through their ProQA, and I want to share some information with this. So there's a couple different ways calls can be problematic from the start. If I call 911 and I tell you that I just saw an accident, but I'm not exactly sure where it is. It's somewhere on the Beltway, and I know I just passed exit such and such. I'm not sure if I'm coming up to exit such and such, but I know it's 2 cars and it's in the same lane that I'm in. The dispatchers have a set of questions that they'll ask. They're only giving you what they get. So it's really important for me to stress so that everybody understands the world of 911, that if a call starts off problematic, it's typically because the dispatcher themselves are getting poor or little to no information. They work their very hardest to try to get that information to you, but again, they still got to dispatch that call out based on the severity. So when we talk about some of the concerns and problems with communication, we're going to come back to that comment. Once the call is actually received and they go through their series of protocols, they determine what that response is going to, they determine what the code is going to be, how they code it out based on what's being said. If it's fire, it comes out as a firebox. If it's a medical call, it comes out as a medical call. If it's police, it's police call. The one thing I'll ask, if anybody could, and Ashley, if you could watch the chat, does anybody want to take a stab at why police always seem to get dispatched or arrive first at an incident? Somebody could put that in the chat why they think that's the case. I'd appreciate it.
Lenny, I'll answer that. Eric
Okay.
Andrews. So basically, to put it simple, the police department for every precinct has a channel 1 dispatcher. So when the call gets routed from 911, it goes right to police and it goes right to that precinct. So that precinct picks the call up immediately. It's not stacked behind anything else, and it gets put out quick, which is why they're getting the call to the precinct right away, where we might be behind a couple of medical calls or something else.
Excellent, Eric. Thank you. Good to see you, buddy. Happy New Year, Eric. Captain Andreas or Eric Andreas is one of the guys I have a tremendous amount of respect for. Also, he's one of those guys. If I could pick on a little later, had a very good presence on the radio. But he made a great point. The one thing I'll also say is the police get their calls first for 2 reasons. Every call that's processed through the 911 center goes through the EPD protocol first. And the reason it goes through the emergency police dispatch protocols first is because if there's any kind of criminal component and or police need, they have to start off with a series of questioning first. Once it goes through the EPD protocol, if it automatically just kicks to fire EMS, then police is out of the equation. But if there's any kind of a criminal component or a police component, it has to get dispatched through them first. The questions have to be asked first, which then couples with what Eric was saying. It goes directly to that dispatcher. They automatically get dispatched out. And the police dispatcher is only dealing with a select group of people right from the start. They typically don't have to look for police officers within other precincts. They don't have to look for another unit from another channel. They don't have to look to see where they are from the map. They dispatch out those cars, and their priorities are their priorities. And we'll talk about that a little bit in communication, but that's excellent. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. So the police dispatchers get dispatched first. And then once that's determined, then that's where they decide where we come into play. Now, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the fire department just to make sure everybody's up to speed when we start talking about some of our jargon. We are incident specific. We have medical calls separate. We have fire calls separate. And then we have medical and fire calls separate. And then we have medical, fire, and police calls. It is important for everyone in this group to understand that the 911 center doesn't dictate our response. They give us a series of protocols and they say, how would you like to handle this specific incident? It's an EMD call. It's an EFD call. What do you want to send on it? And for Baltimore County, we have a pretty rigorous process, believe it or not. And obviously, as you can understand, with all the parties involved, we have what's called the response committee. Now, typically, when a set of protocols has been introduced, we meet as a group, and that group has representation from the volunteers, they have representation from the Officers Council, they have members from the Chief Officers Council, they have members from the 911 Center, they have members as myself from the communication, and we have a group, we sit and get back together and say, how can we do this? Is it effective? Does it make sense? For the most part, we dictate our responses. Our calls are dispatched based on an event type. Something that came, that people, I would imagine got used to pretty quickly is we have our own incident numbers now. So back when we had previous CAD, we would dispatch out a call, and let's say for the 12 o'clock in the morning or 0000, the first call of the night would come out. The first call of the night would be police, typically, most likely. We used to have a poll to see if we would actually get the first call of the night most nights, but typically fire department would end up getting their first call at about 6, 7, or 8. Now that we have Motorola P1 CAD, we have our own series of calls, so we can tell that at any given day, we know exactly how many calls we have, because if you see the first call of the night for the fire department will be incident 1, and the last call of the evening will be incident 500, 600, 800, whatever it is of the day. So that makes it pretty nice in that regards. As far as, yes, great.
Have you noticed an increase in false alarms from crash reporting apps like the new iPhone?
Say one more time.
It says, have you noticed an increase in false alarms from crash reporting apps like the new iPhone?
I don't have that information. I'm going to say no, but I can definitely follow up. I know of one instance specifically where the actual app itself was actually very beneficial to all parties, but I don't know of any false alarms. I'm not going to lie to you. I can check into that and follow up with that, however we do that, Ashley.
Thank you. I can share the information out by email if that's helpful.
Yep, thank you. I'll get that information. So where was it? Okay. So the other thing, so as far as how we operate, Baltimore County Fire Department, we've operated based on 3 battalions. I believe there's some people in this room that could probably attest to back in the day when there were 6 battalions. As I showed you on the map, we have 3 separate battalions. We have the East Battalion, which is from Bel Air Road all the way over to the Baltimore City Anne Arundel County line. We have the Central Battalion, which is Bel Air Road all the way over to Falls Road, I believe. And then from Falls to all the way over to Howard County and Anne Arundel County, we have the West Side. We operate based on battalions, 3 battalions. We operate on boxes that are part of the station areas, and then the individual firebox, which is broken down per station, as most of you may know. Motorola CAD, they operate a little differently in their terminology. Because this was a police-oriented dispatch process back in the day when it first started, they operate by what they call beats and sectors. So I don't foresee, and I certainly wouldn't be a proponent of this, but I don't see us ever calling our firebox beats, and I don't ever see us calling our station areas sectors. And the police, they operate on their forgot the name of it that quickly. Their patrol areas or the roaming areas. So when an incident is coded from the 911 center, it comes over to fire dispatch and/or police dispatcher. The fire dispatcher on main 1 and main 6 will look at that set of calls in what they call the queue, and then they will dispatch that out based on their priority. The really nice thing about Pro QA, and the reason I bring a lot of this stuff up is because, believe it or not, even though you wouldn't think it helps with communication, it helps with communication a lot. Because now the dispatcher is able to dispatch the highest priority call right off the bat without any questions, without looking through things, and their mindset is just right there and on point most of the time. A little bit of overview with the fire department, we have 25 career stations. 28 fire engines in the career, 35 medics. These numbers may be off by 1 or 2, but if anybody catches me on that, please don't hold it to me. We operate with 7 trucks, 8 specialized services, and then the volunteers, we have 28 total stations with 38 fire engines, 5 trucks, 8 squads, 25 medics, and 14 specialized service. It really is a unique and great system in that regards. For anybody that's been with the department any length of time, there's always that frustration sometimes. There's always that, big brother, little brother, big brother, or, this twin brother against that twin brother. But, when it's all said at the end of the day, when we work together well. And I appreciate that. Does anybody want to take a quick break? There's just about an 8-minute podcast. I'm going to play this. If anybody wants to take a break, we can take a break. Ashley, if you're okay, we'll play through it. I'll leave that to you. What do you guys normally do? We're about 39 minutes into it.
Unless anyone really feels like they need a break, I'm okay with continuing on.
Okay, so I'm going to play this. This is going to be a little bit redundant when I start talking about some things later, but again, the gentleman that put this together did a pretty good job. So I'm going to have to stop sharing this screen, and I'm going to have to start sharing that screen.
Podcast first appeared as an article at Fire Moment of Equality in the Fire Service. It is when the microphone of a two-way radio is keyed. This podcast first appeared as an article at firerescue1.com and is meant to promote knowledge and inspire discussion. As firefighters in a new world, you need to understand your role and the responsibility it carries for you, your fellow firefighter, and the community you serve.
Oh, that's not right. Sorry about that. Stand by, guys. I apologize.
Take your time.
Try it one more time.
The two-way portable radio is an integral part of firefighting and operational safety. If there is ever a moment of equality in the fire service, it is when the microphone of a two-way radio is keyed. Critical information and important updates know no rank during an emergency. For this reason, firefighters must be proficient in the use of a two-way portable radio. Proper radio procedures begin with the correct way of using a two-way radio. Keying the mic first and allowing the channel to open avoids clipping the beginning or end of a message. A radio is held upright with the antenna pointing skyward. The mic is placed 1 to 2 inches from a firefighter's mouth, and information is delivered in a normal voice, free from slang, profanity, or jargon. Before speaking, a firefighter needs to formulate what information is to be transmitted. Information must be important and timely and projected in a clear and controlled voice, focused and concise. Every message is repeated back to the sender to verify the information. Messages transmitted via radio should follow the standard operating procedures of a firefighter's department. Firefighters must understand the difficult conditions under which they will be transmitting information over a two-way radio. Communications on the fire ground are fast-paced and noisy. Firefighters are working with loud power saws and striking tools. The environment is smoky and restricts visibility. Add an SCBA and full PPE to adverse working conditions, and a firefighter is challenged in communicating via radio transmissions. Training and repetitive drills are required for successful use of radios during emergency situations. Wireless radios are susceptible to interference from vehicle ignitions, electric motors, high voltage transmission lines, and computers, as well as light sources including light-emitting diodes, LEDs, fluorescent lights, and energy-efficient bulbs. The first unit arriving at an incident is responsible for transmitting a size-up of the situation. Normally, the responsibility of the first arriving officer, the size-up needs to be brief and presented over the airwaves in a clear, precise language. As with all size-ups, the information needed consists of the correct location address, a brief evaluation of the situation, and an exact location and nature of the emergency. In the case of fire, its location, fire phase, and the attack mode selected are included in the size-up information transmitted. If a building is involved, information regarding its size, condition, and construction type, as well as potential occupants and their condition, is necessary information. This gives arriving units a clearer picture of the scene and aids in determining response requirements. In addition to an initial size-up, on-scene radio reports consist of requests and instructions for other units or agency support, a declaration of on-scene command, staging location, the incident name, and the incident commander for the declared incident. Progress reports should be given on a regular basis and a brief action plan transmitted when necessary. After the initial radio report is given, status reports should be initiated every 10 to 15 minutes. Transmitted on a simplex or duplex talk-around channel, this allows all firefighters and associated agency personnel to keep up to date on the situation and informed regarding any changes or corrections regarding tactics and overall scene conditions. Changes include transfer of command, moving command location, direction of fire spread, exposure conditions, as well as anticipated actions or potential challenges. Urgent messages take priority when it comes to radio traffic. Most two-way radios have a button to transmit an emergency signal. When activated, all units stop transmitting and wait for emergency traffic. Emergency traffic consists of an agreed-upon evacuation signal, such as 3 blasts of an air horn or a high-low siren for 15 seconds. A verbal mayday may be given on a prescribed radio channel monitored by all on-scene first responders. A mayday, voiced 3 times, will be followed by prescribed procedures firefighters must know and be trained on, whether it is a member of a rescue team or working as part of a fireground crew. The 5 C's of radio communication gives a firefighter a summary of exactly how to approach using a two-way radio. Conciseness, clarity, confidence, control, and capability outline a successful approach to initiating effective radio traffic. Be brief, be clear, have confidence in the information, stay in control of voice inflections, and be proficient. Practice speaking into a radio. While it seems straightforward, talking over the airwaves, knowing the number of professionals listening and acting on the information transmitted, can be an intimidating experience for any firefighter, regardless of rank or experience. Practice and repetition during drills are critical in preparing a firefighter for that first open mic during an emergency. NFPA 1802, Standard on Personal Portable Two-Way Radio Communications Devices for use by emergency service personnel in the hazard zone, establishes minimum requirements for the proper function of the communications equipment operating in hostile and non-hostile situations. The NFPA, in cooperation with fire departments, radio manufacturers, testing agencies, and industry associations, have developed testing standards for two-way radios and their operation. Under these standards, radios are evaluated for false or unintelligible transmissions, readable displays, transmission and receiving power, as well as sensitivity and safety under stressful conditions.
All right, let me get back to the group. I'm going to stop sharing. Can everybody hear me? I think I lost my
Yes,
audio.
we can hear you.
Okay, great.
We can hear you.
So so is everybody awake after that? when they did that podcast, that gentleman almost put me to sleep, but it was a good podcast, and I wanted to see if anybody had any takeaways from that. There's a couple important things that I want to touch on, and I was wondering if anybody could share their thoughts. Anybody? Eric, if I may call on you, sir, because I don't have my participants up back again. What are some takeaway points you took out of that?
One of the biggest things that people forget about is I think we get lazy with communications. So basically they call out real quick. They don't listen for a second to see whether someone's in the middle of a transmission or whether someone had already been talking or had a communications going on. And I think the thing he did bring up was that he didn't mention was before you say something, think about what you want to say. So you get your thoughts together, take a second. I mean, like forever, take a second, key the mic, and then tell them what you want to say. Make it brief to the point. The thing I see now we're having a problem with is people, and this not so much for video, is people are afraid to communicate what they see or what they want. Referring to an SOP doesn't make sense because on the volunteer side, which I see have been in now for 4 years, the training is not mandated. The training is not every day. The training is not pushed out like it is in the career service. And it's hard to stay up with changes. In the communication link, there's definitely a non-communication link between what needs to happen and what actually gets to the field or to the service. But if you keep it a secret, nobody knows what's going on. I want to communicate and talk about one thing. I heard a fire last night in a 16 box. The 16 was first in on, and an 8 box tonight. 2 different shifts. One was a captain, one was a lieutenant. Phenomenal, because they told people what they wanted to do. It didn't matter what the SOP said. They gave a quick size up. They told them what their assignments were, and it was done on the radio before they got there. You need, on fire side especially, you need to say what's going on. You need to tell them what you want when they arrive and not worry about what the SOP says where you should be. The street might be blocked. It might be salty. It might be impassable. There's a lot of things that are going on, and people don't want to talk. They say, well, they'll see it when they get here. That's too late. You should already be having a plan in your mind. If you keep your plan a secret, no one knows what's going on. So communicate it out to the people, so the junior people, the senior people, and the ones you should already be thinking about what's going on. If you're not paying attention en route, which happens quite a bit, did you lay a line? Well, the guy just told you he was dropping hose from the corner of wherever, Main Street and First. You don't need to ask him that because you should have been paying attention. And a lot of times we get communication in the unit. The worst thing I ever did was put radios in apparatus. As far as like stereo systems, people are playing on their phone. They're not listening going down the road. It is essential you pay attention to the call you're going on for other units responding to adjacent calls or what they're arriving and giving a size up on. And we've become very weak.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Eric. Thank you very much for that. I often think that if we used our radios like we used our smartphones, we wouldn't have this conversation ever. People are amazing on smartphones, but the radios we seem to have problems with. And Eric brought up some exceptional points, and I want to come back on some training issues too, and I'll probably touch on that in some slides. You have to say what you want, and you have to say what you need, and that has to be communicated. Now, Eric, and I haven't seen him in a while, but he was one of the officers that I utmost respected on the radio because his command presence, his knowledge, his expertise, and his ability to run a fireground actually was portrayed within his communications. Now, I say that for a couple different reasons. It's fair to say somebody at that level is going to project that level of knowledge and experience. That being said, someone that's just starting out tomorrow on an ambulance, and we'll use a medic because it's not uncommon for you to be on an ambulance and or medic, and you really not have a lot of experience in the setting of a radio. And that's fine. That's completely understandable. But where we drop the ball, I think, a little bit, all of us, is we don't train enough. We can take somebody who's knowledge-wise, skill-wise, on point, but doesn't use a radio a lot, and their communication is ineffective, and it's almost as if I don't want to say degrades that individual, but it lessens that individual in other people's perspective because their knowledge and their skill is not being portrayed in that communication. And I want you guys to understand that, because the only way we're going to improve in our communications, and Steve said it before, and I believe Rick also, and Ari, communication is what we do. If we don't have communication on the fire ground, we don't have an effective fire ground. And how often, for any of you that are officers in this group, whether it be volunteer or career, we'll go out and pull a hose line off a fire engine, and we'll practice advancing hose lines upstairs, and we'll go out and we'll do, we'll run an EMS drill, and we'll do whatever with that EMS. How many times do we sit at a fire station and we send one person off to a room, and we go onto a training channel and we ad lib a scenario with the radios? And I think that's important to keep in mind, because radios and radio etiquette and communication has to be part of the training, just like any other training. And I think we drop the ball on that a lot. So keep that in mind. Is there any other takeaway points that you guys got from that podcast that anybody would like to interject with? Because there was a couple points I want to bring up, but I want to see if you guys picked them up at all. And Ashley, if you could monitor the chat for me, I'd appreciate that, because I can't see it.
Yep, and we just have one comment. It says the better people get on their phones, the worse they are at verbalizing what they want.
Well, and there's some truth to that. So again, keep that in mind. The radios, what I would challenge you with after tonight's class is prioritize training your personnel on radios, how to use radios, how to talk on the radios. If you're doing an EMS drill, let them go through that drill and then actually do a consult at the end. Take somebody from your group who's pretty up on the protocols and make them the medical director and stick them in one room, and make your people do a consult and train as if you're practicing. The same with the fire ground. If you guys are doing fire ground, if you're doing a burn, if you guys, you got a car in the backyard and you're cutting up a car, take your officers, put somebody in the building. This is, I am one of those old guys now. I'm getting into my senior ages. Take somebody that's been around the block a while and don't need to play, and put them in the room with the radio and let them be the dispatcher, and have your officers communicate through that process while you have your younger members cutting up that car. I promise you that will go a long way. That was something I never did. I don't remember training on until I got in my role. And then I thought, we missed a big opportunity there. So if I could challenge you guys to do that, I would appreciate that.
Share a couple more comments.
Go ahead.
Frank says mechanics of using the mic, being too close, talking across it and not into it. And then Victoria asks, can you please repeat the 5 C's?
Yes, we're actually gonna cover the 5 C's. So thank you for that. And the other one, as far as talking to the mic, could you repeat that again, Ashley?
Yes, I think it was just a statement. Mechanics of, he was just saying in regards to training, mechanics of using the mic, being too close and talking across it and not into it.
We're going to talk about that too. So that was excellent points. I appreciate both of you for bringing that up.
And then we have a couple more. Ari says the average person has 30 seconds attention span. Russ says, I like to tell people that if you paint a decent picture, you might get questions that trigger something you didn't think about.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. Good point. You want to ad lib on that a little bit, if you may?
Me, Ari?
Yes. Yeah. Ad lib on your comment for a minute, because there was a couple things that intrigued me in there.
So I do a lot of jury trial practice, and what we have to learn is how do you get your point across without people zoning out, sleeping, because that happens, or just completely nullifying and not caring. And so what in studies that we've done as we do trainings, and we do a lot of trainings, whether they're put on by another company or we just do our own, we found that the average person's attention span has gone down because of electronics. Is now, it used to be closer to a minute. It went to 45, and now it's dropped to just about 30 seconds, which means if you can think about an opening statement, I have to get in, get out, and convey and capture the audience so that they're going to sit there and watch what happens during the trial and actually pay attention.
That's excellent. So that you bring up an excellent thought just then and there. So 30 seconds, I think I would agree that your attention span going from a minute to 30 seconds is not a good thing. And unfortunately, that is most of us. But I'm going to pick on some of my officers in the room. And I believe I saw Rick in here. Rick, not Rick, I'm sorry. I apologize, Rick. Not that I don't know you right an officer in the volunteers, but there was another person in here I want to pick on. And we'll go back to Rick. Rick's an officer. He knows this. Rick, in 30 seconds, do you think you can get out a good, effective VIR?
Yes, I think you can paint a pretty good picture in 30 seconds. I think actually way less than that. 30 seconds is a long time in reality in a fire situation.
So Ari brought up a good point. Ari brought up that in his line, as far as lawyers and defense and opening closing statements, it used to be everybody's attention span was at a minute, then it went for 45. Now he's got about 30 seconds to grab the attention of the jury and paint a picture. So when we paint that BIR, and I asked anybody in the room do I have anybody who wants to volunteer as a attendant or a medic that does consults if they think they can do a good consult within 30 seconds. Anybody want to pipe up and say that they think they do good consults?
Yeah, I apologize.
I can give you one from the doctor perspective, but
All right, Dr. Sagal, go for it.
yeah, I'll give you one off of because I ride the ambulance, everyone knows. So I'll give you one for, I guess, like the EMS call to the hospital. So this is Baltimore County Medic 325 arrived location. How do you copy?
I'm clear, sir. Go ahead.
All right, we're at location in Pikesville with a 65-year-old male who called tonight with a complaint of chest pain. Pain radiates to his left upper shoulders. Patient has onset within the last 30 minutes and decided to call EMS. This is new to this patient. He's never experienced it before. Patient has a past medical history to include hypertension, hyperlipidemia. He is on medications for blood pressure to include Procardia, lisinopril, and HCTZ. He has no allergies. Physical exam notes vital signs: blood pressure 120/80, heart rate 56, room air sat 98% with a respiratory rate of 16. We have him on a monitor that shows an EKG of sinus rhythm, no ectopy. We have oxygen 3 liters via nasal cannula, and we have established a saline lock. We gave him 0.4 milligrams of nitro sublingual for his chest pain with good response. We will be transported to your facility with an ETA of approximately 12 minutes. Do you want any further interventions?
Excellent. So Dr. Sagal, I don't know if that was a little over 30, but I know it wasn't a minute. So that was excellent. And that was non-rehearsed, by the way. So the reason I bring this up is, does anybody know when our radios will bunk you out once you've held the button down and started talking too long? Anybody take a stab at how long that is before you get bunked, before you have to rekey up and then start over again?
I thought it was a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. It's a minute. So I want everybody to keep that in mind too. You get a minute before that radio says you've talked too long and I've got to reset myself. So if you can get out what you need to get out within a minute and that communication be effective, you're doing well. Now, as Ari said, if we go by what he was saying, and I believe that to be true, you get 30 seconds to get it out before people start paying attention to you. Now, take this into consideration. And then what I think we'll do is we'll take a break and then we'll finish up the rest of the class. But if you've got 30 seconds for somebody's attention span, how much time do you think you'll have when they've got a bunch of stuff going on in the background? You got fire, you got people yelling, you got people screaming. You really got to get a lot out quick and you got to gain their attention. So keep that in mind. Let's do this. Let's take a quick 5-minute break if you're okay with that, Ashley. Everybody take a bathroom break. We'll come back. We'll go through the 5 C's of radio communication. We got a couple more slides. And then we're going to hear some audio and they're going to critique that based on what everybody's learned and what everybody's thinking. And then we'll get out of here. How about that?
Sounds good. And there's just one quick comment. It says volunteer stations don't have trainings of the radio. It's more of a document and not actual knowledge of the radio. And that was Richard Williams.
You said they don't have training?
Yes. Yeah. Not an actual training of the radio. It's a document with just knowledge of the radio.
And you said that was Rich Williams?
Yes.
Hey, Rich, could you expand on that a little bit? What would you like to see? And I'm going to say that probably holds true for a career too. So how can we make that better? What training could we do to help you guys out, help the field out in general?
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Basically, the doctor gave, a nice brief example of a consult of, what it should be and how it should be. normally when you volunteer, you know, we just get in the medic and just basically have our TAC channels or what channel to call for ADO or anything like that. But how he gave the details of everything, that was, I understand, you know, the critical points to touch now and the length of the radio before we're kicked out. So it was perfect. But if, you know, more stations could have more examples of, you know, how he just provided, then that would be great.
Okay. I'll see what we can do to work on that. Thank you for that input. I appreciate it. All right, everyone, it's 8:04. Let's come back at 8:10. Everybody take a quick break, 8:10, and then we'll roll out the rest of this lecture. I really do appreciate everybody's participation and input. See you in a couple.
I can start, man. Or yeah, maybe we can do one. You want to do one Law and Order and then Landman?
Okay, everyone, it's 8:10. For those that are coming back or off, or we'll hopefully catch up with them, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I believe it was Ashley. Ashley, who did you say wanted the 5 C's in the chat?
Give me 1 second. I have to scroll up, and then we have a couple of comments that we can catch up on.
That's okay if you can't get to it. So the young lady that wanted the 5 C's, we're going to talk about that just in a minute. I appreciate you bringing that up. Ashley, you want to go ahead and we'll talk about some of the comments?
Yes. Give me just a second.
No, take your time.
It looks like there's just a comment with someone saying that they don't personally ride that often, and they ask every time to change channels and where to go. Sounds like we need a reference to more training. And then H says, my station has a book that has a consult sheet for new providers, and it's like a guide to consulting on the radio. Also, they go over a brief radio training, but they don't use the radios on that training. And then Blake says part of orientation for new employees in Harford DES is to spend 4 hours in dispatch. Really was amazing to see how it all works. And then also MEMS has a 60-second report con ed class that is all about consults with hospitals. And it looks like Richard said that he saw that he watched that.
Excellent. Some great comments, and I appreciate all your input. I will say that, and I was going to get into this a little later, but if I forget it, I don't want to forget it. I will tell those of you that are in here, there is a new fleet map that the radio shop has put together. There's been some significant changes with the radios as far as what's on what talk groups and what channels are on what talk groups. They're actually going to go out and put hands on the radio again for the EAB training channel. So once that is complete, I can assure you that I will be sending out the new fleet map for us now. For those of you who don't know what a fleet map is, it's basically a sheet that tells you what channels and what talk groups are on what zones within the radio. Now, I obviously can't show you in this class how the radio works for time's sake, but I would strongly recommend that those of you that don't play, it does not take anything to do radio training. If 4 of you are sitting around the station and 3 of you are somewhat new, then go out and grab 4 radios off the engine and sit at the table and flip through them and practice changing channels and practice little stuff like that goes a long way. And then take it one step further and go to 4 different areas and go to a training channel. Now, I will say this, don't just do it willy-nilly. If you guys want to put on a formalized training, or for that matter, even an impromptu training, just call up to the ADO, ask them to use a training channel. The ADO will coordinate with the radio shop, or not the radio shop, the academy and/or dispatch, and we'll give you a channel to practice on and train on for whatever period of time that you want to train. So just know that you can do that. Just contact ADO. ADO will help you through that process. If you want to do it officially and plan it out, that's great. If you want to do it in the spur of the moment, they'll help you do that as well. So moving on, for time's sake, it's 8:13, and depending on how the scenarios go and listening to the audio, 8:30-ish is where we're going to be as far as a stop. But I always like to go longer as long as you're willing to go longer. So the 5 C's of the radio, this is pretty common knowledge in the communication world, and it's pretty consistent across multiple disciplines, not just the fire department. And the 5 C's are simple. It's be concise, be brief, say only what you need to say as quickly as you need to say it. And when I say quickly, that doesn't mean say it quickly. It just means say what you need to say and then move on. Clarity, be clear in your message. Confidence is big. Now, here's where I think it's fair to say that a lot of our problems come into play in communication. Confidence obviously comes with experience. It comes with knowledge, and it comes with time and service. So if you're just starting out and you're new and you're unpracticed and you're untrained, your confidence level is obviously going to be reflective of that. And that's of no fault of anybody. That's where we need to take the time individually and as a department to say, hey, look, let's work on your knowledge. Let's work on your training. Let's work on your experience. If I could pick on Eric again, that's the one thing as one of my mentors that I always respected with him. He trained constantly. Steve Miller, Chief Miller was my chief when I started in the fire department. Chief Miller was big on his people training back then and until he retired. Training's critical, and when you train, you're effective. And then control, stay in control of your voice inflections. It doesn't matter, and I'll go back to that new provider that's just starting out. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you have, how much experience you have, but when your voice says that I'm not in control, people hear that, and that changes the game. And we'll listen to some audio, and I'm sure most of you can appreciate it, but that's key. If I talk confidently, effectively, and smoothly, people are going to listen. And then again, capability. I can't stress this enough. Take the opportunity to train and practice with the radios.
Hey, Lenny, real quick, one thing.
Yes, sir.
So, Cap, one of the things that's come up over the years in line of duty deaths and also training, you need to train on the Maydays. And that's the thing, you have to call dispatch, especially for that, and let them know what channel they want you on. So when you go on Mayday, 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 someone's not freaking out and not pushing the emergency button's the other key. But you have to use a channel. A lot of people want to use the talk around because they don't want to bother dispatch. But they found out a lot of case studies that not having that second beep, 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 when the key's up, is screwing people up because they start talking right away. And when you're actually on the actual channel that we use on a repeater, they're missing the first part of the transmission because they think that they're on a talk around with nothing behind them and they're not on a trunk system. So you got to make sure when you're training on one of the side channels that dispatch gives you and not on a talk around that don't create a training score.
Correct. And Eric, I don't want to get ahead of myself in slides, but I really wish you were here for the EAB stuff that's about to come out. In the 24 years that I've been here thus far, this is a game changer. And I know that you pushed very hard for the emergency training in that when you were here. So we've got some good stuff coming as far as that concerned. And as Eric said, it's important to get a hold of, and that's why I told you to contact ADO, and they'll help you work through getting you a channel. And now the Mayday training and the Signal 13 and the emergency training, we'll talk about that in a minute. But we can get you on a training. So ineffective communication has obviously been one of the biggest. The last five years ago or so, there was an in-depth review for line of duty deaths in the National Institute for Occupational Health and Safety, or Safety and Health, that identified the top 5 contributing factors and tragedies in the fire department, known as the NIOSH 5. One of these were critical to communications. And even though we would say to ourselves, well, that makes that makes sense. That makes absolute sense. It's something that we can very easily fix. And it doesn't take a lot of resources. It doesn't take any amount of money because we already have the radios. It just takes time and effort. If I'm knowledgeable, I know my radios, I use my radios, and I say what I want to say, all of that is free. So I can't stress that enough. Some of the things that ineffective communication has contributed to in every department, to include ours, obviously, is line of duty deaths and injuries. That's number one. Any NIOSH report you read for any near miss with significant injury or any line of duty death, communication and lack of communication is going to be a factor. It has contributed to the lack of unit response. Units have gotten, whether it be CAD legacy, new CAD, a CAD that comes after this CAD, units get missed. They get left off calls. Delayed responses, misinterpretation of tactics and objectives on the fire ground, and stress and fatigue to both the dispatchers and fire ground personnel. Is there anything in there that you can think of, or anything not in there that you can think of that also is contributory to ineffective communication? Because anytime we're not communicating effectively, and this holds true with everything in life, for those of us in this group that are married, that have been married for a long time, if you're not communicating effectively with your partner, it's a bad day. It's a worse day if you're on a fire ground controlling the fire. It's an even worse day when you're a medic and you have a cardiac arrest. Communication is critical in everything we do. So please, please, please practice. Some of the contributory factors to effective communication or lack of effective communication is the infrastructure. Now, I can tell you in the last, it's been about in the last 10 years, but in the last 3 or 4 years, especially moving into the P1 application, Baltimore County Radio Shop and Baltimore County as a whole has invested a significant amount of money in the infrastructure. There's been more towers put into place. There's been more repeaters put into place. The radios have been upgraded. We do have some very, very good radios with the P25 radios, the APX radios, and there's some good stuff coming from that. Training is, again, make it or break it. The lack of training or the amount of training makes radio communications effective. The ability for you to use the radio is critical. If you don't know how to use that radio, we had a fire ground. We had an incident not too long ago where, and again, the one thing I'll say as we get into these next couple slides and we start talking about some things, if you're familiar with these situations, the people involved, there's no criticism to the people involved. There's no judgment in the people involved. There's no judgment of the fire ground. It is what it is. If you don't know how to go from one talk group within a zone to another talk group within a zone by just changing the knob, you should probably go out and pull a radio off a piece of equipment soon and start playing with it. The knowledge of your role is critical, and the confidence that you have within your role is critical. It's fair to say that not everybody gets better with age and time and experience, but for the most part, we all do get better with age, time, and experience, especially with the use of the radio, because we're more comfortable in our skill, we're more comfortable with our knowledge, and we're more comfortable in the role that we're doing. So pass that knowledge on to your younger people, because that's important. I can't stress the importance of the familiarity with the radio itself. And then one of the things that helped us immensely, and for those of you that have been around a while and know back in the day when we used to have the first MSAs and then we went to Scott's and now we're going to MSAs with the Bluetooth, the radio communication is amazing. It's almost crystal clear. Now that's dependent on, again, certain issues. You got to make sure your seal's proper with your mask. You got to make sure your seal's tight. So just because we have the technology, if we don't do things right, we're not going to have that effective communication. So that's really important to understand as well. So I forget who brought this up, but proper radio use, and this comes right from a couple different sources, is obviously you want to confirm your message. You do want to place the radio 1 to 2 inches from your mouth, so directly in front of your mouth, not up against your mouth, not lip servicing the mic, but 1 to 2 inches. 2 inches is probably a good distance away from your mouth. And you want to hold the antenna up. You want to repeat your message and make sure your message has been received back. Deliver your message in a normal voice. No use of slang, profanity, or jargon. Now, if we're in the same jurisdiction, we know jargon. Everybody knows when somebody says a fire's knocked, that the fire's been basically contained to a degree where it's not under control, but there's not really a lot of fires. So when you're using jargon, if you're using it within a jurisdiction that's understanding of it, it makes it a little easier, but try not to use jargon when possible, and then just practice. Any questions, comments, or concerns at this point? All right, so we'll move on. We're at slide 17 of 24, and the last couple are, so we're doing good. Okay, so a lot of things we do in life is the who, what, why, and how, and where. So I formed the next slide into that thought process in message delivery. Form the message. Who do I need to address? Who can address the problem? Meaning, what additional resources do I need? And how quickly, and who doesn't need to communicate in the moment? The who doesn't need to communicate in the moment is going to be important when you're listening to this next group of audio. We always, most of us have a tendency to want to talk on the radio. Everybody feels that what they need to say is important. I'm not downgrading that thought, but I want you to truly think, and listening to that audio, what you have to say. Is it really important? If I could pick on a couple more people that haven't talked, Chuck, if I could pick on you, Chuck, if you're there and listening, can you tell me how many times you've been on the radio and you've heard people say stuff that in your mind, you're like, dude, that is just not important in the moment. You've been doing this a long time. What percentage of the time do you think that happens on the radio, Chuck? Chuck's not there. All right, fair enough. I guess anybody want to take a stab at that? Volunteers?
I'll give it 30%.
30% of the time, people are just saying stuff they don't need to say. I would probably think that it's a little bit more, but 30% is a lot when you're talking on the radio. Keep in mind what you're saying, and we'll talk about this in another slide, but just when you key up that radio doesn't mean you need to say something right away. If somebody's talking on the radio, let them finish. If you key up, say what you got to say slowly and be done. And we're gonna take two separate TAC talk groups, and we're gonna listen to a couple things, and you'll hear what I mean. The next thing I want everybody to understand is to prioritize the delivery. What do you need to say? What do you need to request? And what can I eliminate? What do I need? What do I need to request? What do I need to say? And what can I eliminate? It's really just that simple. And then deliver the message, direct and to the point in a normal voice. For those of you that know Chief Hughes talks on the radio, and when I first heard it, I thought it a little odd, and then I realized what he was doing. He is purposely, intentionally keeping his inflections and his tone to a point in which it's the same all the time. Dispatch, Deputy 2's en route. And I have some audio of him, and I'll let you hear it. He's concise, he's to the point, and he's slow intentionally. To some, that may be bothersome, but there's a reason that he does it. You want to verify the message. Was the message what you wanted, and was it repeated back to you and received? That's the other thing that goes along with poor communications. I may speak as well as I need to speak and as clear as I want to speak, but as Ari was saying, if I've lost somebody's attention span, or they're not paying attention to that message and that message wasn't received, it doesn't matter how good I've sent it, it wasn't received. So that's another critical component, and I believe it was Rick that said that back in the beginning. That's where you want that circle. I said it, you received it, you told me that you received it, it's going to get done. And that's critical. And that's the request, the message being answered and or completed. And then in that process, it's critical that you correct any discrepancies in the delivery or the reception of the message. If somebody says, I want you to pull 1.5 inches and go to side Bravo and do a transitional attack, and they come back to you and say, direct, pull 2.5, going to side Alpha. It's critical that you correct that information immediately, because obviously that message wasn't received, and it clearly had nothing potentially to do with your delivery. And then review the message. After every call, we do pretty much a hot wash or an after action review of some sort in the station, informally, formally, whatever. How often do we talk about our radio communications? Dude, the radio communications sucked on that call. We didn't do this. We didn't say that. We could have said this. We should have said that. That's almost never talked about in that hot wash. Make it a point to start making that part of your hot wash, and getting everybody to understand that that's important. All right, I'm going to let you listen to this. I am going to flip through, we're not going to listen to the whole thing just because of time, but if I could just real briefly show everybody. Now, you're obviously not going to see this. This is something that when we record the audio, this is a divisional talk group, but if you can see here that the time starts at 17:04.
We don't see anything.
Oh, you don't see that? I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me see. I guess I'm not sharing my proper screen. I apologize. Thank you for that. Oh, great. Now I'm going to have technical difficulty as to what you can see and what you can't see, and it's 8:28. Am I sharing anything?
Not yet.
No.
Okay.
And also, if anyone needs to hop off, we will continue recording and it'll be posted on YouTube.
Yeah,
So
I do
you'll be able to
apologize about
continue
that.
watching.
All right, for the sake of time, I'm not sure actually what's going on my end, but I'm hitting share. Let me do this. And it won't let me pick what I'm sharing. Oh, there it is. Okay, I apologize. I got it. In one share.
We know how technology is.
I got it. That was on me that time because it was buried behind the other one. So real quick, and for those of you that got to hop off, I do apologize. I thought this was 2 hours. I was trying to get it done in an hour and a half, and Ashley told me we're slated for an hour and a half. So we'll take a couple more minutes and we'll be done. But I appreciate your time and your attendance. And I will give Ashley these slides if anybody has to jump off and wants the rest of them. So I do appreciate that. So going back to this, if you can see, this is a divisional talk group. And you can see between the time of 1704 all the way out to 1726, it gets pretty condensed. There was a tremendous amount of radio chatter on this talk group. So I'm going to let you start listening to it. We'll talk about a couple things and then we'll move on.
We're on 83 southbound, enter 39 box. Would you want us on that 83 and put 505 on break view? That's fine. Ambo 505 from dispatch. Ambo 505. So switch your assignment with Ambo 455. Stand by. Ambo 505. You're going to box area 39-22, 11509 McCormick Road to Brightview, across the International Circle for a fall. You have utility 397 on scene. You know, 6 rounds. EMS 6, have you route 15 has arrived. Medic 116, have you arrived? 505 en route. Have you en route, 1703.
Okay. Real quick, if I could just stop there, a couple things right off the back. What did you guys notice? What, if anything, did you guys notice right off the bat? Anybody want to put it in chat or take a stab at it?
It
sounded like. Oh,
I apologize.
no, I didn't know you were coming on. I'm sorry about that. I was just gonna say it sounded like 505 was like delaying, like it was taking them a long time to respond.
Okay, good point. But think about when they sent that message. That's what I wanted to hone in on. There was 2 units in there. The other gentleman, I'm sorry, I'm for the sake of time, I'm not going to try to bring you guys back up so I can see who was talking. But you brought up, you started to talk. What did you have to say?
I was going to say that they didn't respond right away. They waited and gave it time so that the message could be received and then responded.
Yep, it started off very nicely. Everybody was doing their own thing. Everybody was talking in sequence. No one was talking on top of the other. A couple units keyed up, talked on top of one another. And again, it's hard for us to hear that on the radio when we're talking. That's where the radio kind of does its own thing in the sense that you key up first. That other person shouldn't be able to bunk you out. The dispatchers, they don't hear that way. The dispatchers hear whoever keys up and starts talking. What you hear and what they hear, they have total control of that radio. So it's really important. And the thing that I want to stress in this, and I'm going to try to find the exact spot just for time's sake where things got awry for the poor dispatcher. It's really important that you take 5 seconds to just listen to see if anybody's on the radio first and then key up. And that's what I wanted to bring to light. Let me see if I can get to where I need to get with this.
Ambo 1, 1704. 6 dispatchers, 9 by ALS, put them in service, all great. Correct, medic 9.
Clearing station.
1704.
Medic 101's clear. Could you place this unit returning out of service?
Clear and out of service, 1705. Engine 14's around 30 blocks.
Okay. I tell you what I'm going to do for the sake of time. That's a lot since we're over. There was a couple. I want to let you listen to the tactical talk groups in the first start of that, which is why I don't want to take too much time on this divisional. There's a couple things that you would have listened to and you would have heard in this talk group. There was an incident on, I believe it was 83. If anybody's familiar with this, please don't comment on the specifics. It's irrelevant at this point. But obviously, unrelated again to this discussion, is we're sending more units on the Beltway. Now, for anybody that picked up on the fact that this was a divisional talk group, this was central. We had a Medic 9 getting dispatched to a central call. We had Medic 15, we had Medic 5, we had Medic 395, and we had a couple other medics. And then we had the engines trying to look for this incident. And at any given point, there was 2 to 3 people talking to or over the dispatcher or over one another. The take-home message that I wanted to get out to the group with this divisional talk group is, and again, this is not, I am not making policy for the fire department. I am not contradicting policy or SOPs when I say this. I do not want it to be construed that way. But I want people to understand that we have our SOPs and the dispatch has SOPs. We have SOPs. Does anybody want to take a stab at what our SOPs say as far as what we need as far as our status to communicate? Do we need to communicate en route? Do we need to communicate arrive? Do we need to communicate to the hospital? Anybody have any knowledge on the SOPs as far as that's concerned? What do you think the SOPs say as far as what we have to communicate in that regards? Anybody? Anything in the chat, Ash?
One comment, it says in St. Mary's and Calvert, we do.
They do have SOPs. Would you guys, for those that put that in chat, what do you have to communicate on the radio as far as your status? Everything or just certain statuses?
En route and clear.
Yep. Okay. So you guys, is that your departmental policy or is that 911 policy? Or both?
Well, this was Kathy with Baltimore County.
Oh, hey,
And
Kathy. Yes.
so en route and clear for us.
Yep. You are correct. For us, it is en route and clear. Now that's you say that's departmental policy and 911. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay. So let's think about this for a minute. Now, regardless of what your opinion is with new CAD, we have the ability, just like we did with Z-Client, to change our statuses on the radio. If you feel the need to communicate your statuses, and I know that we could have a whole nother discussion on whether, if Eric, for example, is on the fire ground and Chief Miller's the chief, whether he wants to hear or whether they want to hear units arriving or not. There's a whole conversation that could be had on that. As far as the dispatcher is concerned, they want to know that you're en route and they need to know that you're clear so that they can dispatch you to a call and so they can make sure they don't have to put another unit on it. As far as we're concerned, SOP wise, I do apologize. I'm pretty sure the SOPs are consistent with en route and clear because that's the center kind of we took what they wanted and gave them their kudos on that one. We didn't really clarify what we needed. So that being said, when Medic 101, for example, when they cleared and then they put themselves out of service, not saying that was wrong, but there's time right there in that message we could have saved. We could have just said Medic 101's clear. And then once we got clear, we could have put ourselves out of service and we wouldn't have had to interject that communication. So take opportunities when you can to say less. And I would encourage you to train with your people to really take the time to think, do I need to say that? Do I need to even interject that status? The one thing that you didn't hear on this was there were several people just over talking the dispatcher, over talking it. And as frustrating as it was for me to listen, that in-depth dispatcher controlled that channel exceptionally well to the point where one of the EMS officers said, strong job. But we'll listen to the next talk group. You'll hear it a little bit. It's quicker because it's a tactical talk group. It's on a tactical channel, so people are more willing to call out more quickly, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Okay, so the first call I'm going to let you listen to we'll listen for the first couple units going out.
41. Station 4 engine. 1536. Squad 354, 1539. Head 41. 19. Station 4 engine. 1536.
Something's not coming in here with audio.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking it's probably trying to buffer or I do apologize. This worked well when I tested it.
Check fire route. That's 2-story. Appear to be a single family, fixed occupancy. I got fire showing from appear to be Charlie side. So it's probably a working fire. Truck 5 advised working. 5 fire showing. Location request working fire. Man, engine 5. Truck 5 was state search and rescue. 352 arrived. 352, see if you can get around Charlie. Engine 5 has arrived at Civic Command. Engine 5 now with command 1541. Medic 375 arrived. Medic 375, 1541.
Okay, and what you didn't hear in there, and I can't apologize enough. The audio was flawless until I put it into the PowerPoint. But what you didn't hear in here, and this actually was the 36 after action review that we did, and as with any other near miss and or AAR or line of duty death, one of the things that was identified is in communication. And then just in that very brief period, you heard a couple units trump the dispatcher, a couple units talk over the dispatcher. One was talking, the command, the officer in the first arriving units was talking in the background over top. And clearly for those reasons, the call may or may not have started off poorly, just in the communication aspect. And then I'm going to play this, and I hope it plays well for you. I just don't want to keep you longer than need be, but I want you to hear this one too.
Engine 202, 1558.
Dispatch from Deputy Chief D. You can have me to the 55 box. I'm en route.
Chief 2 on direct, 1559. Okay, 3 en route. INC 3 have you en route, 1559.
It's 12 route.
Engine 12, 1559.
Engine 16's en route.
Joel 1 out.
Engine 16, 1559.
Sandy, 55 rep.
Just go want to have you around. Engine 55 and have you around. Truck want to have you around.
Truck 1 to route. Truck 8 route.
Truck 8 have you around. 1559. Engine 2 there, turn out. Engine 202.
So just in that short span of time, I don't know if you caught the difference, but just in that short span of time, just in that short period of time, you heard everybody calling out consistently, evenly, and on point. Versus the other one, and again, I'm not blaming anybody, throwing any fingers, pointing any blame, making any comparisons. Units were talking over one another, calling around over one another, and talking over the dispatcher. It really is important. And again, I'll send this slide set to Ashley if anybody wants to listen to it. It really is important for you guys to understand when you're making those radio communications, slow and steady wins the race. Slow, steady, and effective wins the race. And I was trying to let you hear some of what the dispatchers experience when they have to deal with that communication. And again, they take this just as hard as you do. So when you guys are throwing stuff at them and they've got 5 or 6 things they've got to do in the background and click this button and make that step and add this note, it's a lot. And, you know, again, your presence when you arrive and their presence in that seat make or break the start of that incident, just from a perceptual standpoint. Not to mention the fact if things are going well just in general, then it's really a bad day. So just so I don't keep you. Go ahead, sir.
So we're talking about airtime and avoiding extraneous messages and stuff. However, some things obviously are important. I know, especially like in the medic unit, because I ride the medic unit a lot, and when you call out, but I found that on the status bar, you can just push the button that says arrive to hospital, at hospital, clear. What did this see? And all those times record, does the dispatch see all of that they know you've arrived at your location or you've cleared location when you push those status bars without talking on the radio?
Dr. Sagal, I'm glad you brought that up because we could probably have a whole nother 45-minute conversation on what's important to verbalize and what's not. The young lady that brought up that we only have to voice en route and clear, that's important to understand because we do have those status buttons. We did have those status buttons when we had Z-Cline in the engines and the cabs, and when we have P1 now, you can put those statuses in yourself. Now, the reason again dispatch requires en route is because they want to make sure that you're en route and that you get the proper number of units coming. The nice thing, regardless of personal opinion, that the dispatchers now are getting is they're getting those recommended units on duty right from the start. And when units are coming at and no disrespect to the volunteers when I say this at all, because again, I get it. I've been there. I do it. Is they've got units on the road. So now you guys are for a better, you're enhancing the box and or adding to the box. So I've tried to express to them they can take a little bit of a breath in the steps they have to do when somebody calls out short and they're off duty and that kind of stuff. But if I would have had time to let you listen to the full first tactical talk group in the beginning and we didn't have that little hiccup in the audio, you would have heard everybody calling in route, jumping over one another, people stepping on one another, this, that, and the other. In the second video, the dispatcher actually, if you noticed that last blurb, she acknowledged units that had already put themselves en route, even though they hadn't called out yet, because she could see that they changed and put themselves en route. Now, there's a lot of discussions, in my personal opinion only, this is just my personal opinion, I've talked to the dispatchers and said, why would it be so bad if nobody called en route? And again, they have a reason they're strong about it. I'm not saying they should change that policy, But there's nothing saying, like you said, Dr. Sagal, where I can put myself in those statuses that I don't have to voice, and the dispatcher can see that. Now, here's the nice thing about the system. We understand, because you potentially don't communicate that information, that it could get missed, which is why we built timers into every status that flashes to the dispatcher that says, hey, it's been X amount of time and this person's still in that status and really shouldn't be. You haven't checked on them, and vice versa. So for that reason, we built in safety. But you are correct. If you get in the habit of changing your statuses on the mobile, it helps because that's less radio chatter. And we're our worst enemies. If you don't have to say anything, don't say anything. I know when we want to try to run calls and we want to be there and we want to help, but if I clear and call and there's all this radio chatter going on, I don't have to get right back on the radio and step over somebody to say, do you want me to go somewhere else? I promise you, once you clear that call, they're going to figure out that you're available and put you on that call. So it's okay to wait a little bit of time for them to come back, or until, more importantly, the channel's clear and say, hey, just throwing this out there, do you still want me to, I'm available. Do you want me to stay and do something else? Or just go back to one and say, I'm available. I know there's a lot going on Central. Just food for thoughts.
Yeah,
but thank you, Dr. Sagal. You bring up an excellent point.
Yeah, I just find it much simpler when there's 5 other units talking, rather than wait and try and figure out where the hole is you just touch the screen and it changes your status. But I never really knew what they see on the other side, if they know that happens, if it's instant or what.
We went as far as we are coming out with some things for the chief officers, and I'll bring that up in this slide, Dr. Sagal. I appreciate that. Misty, who does the provisioning for the 911 center for the new CAD, because the fire dispatchers have requested, have given them various different colors for the unit statuses so they can visually see. Now, to their credit, they only have two screens, and they have a lot of statuses they can look at now, so they don't have a lot of real estate to do what they really could do effectively. So I would hope, and if we ever get to the point where they put that new center and they give them some more monitors so they can see this stuff better, but they got a lot to do and they have a limited space, so it is hard, but yes, they can see it. One thing that we're coming around, and I'll bring this slide up and then I want to conclude for everybody's time because I'm well over an hour and a half, is part of the enhancements that were made with this system, and departmentally based on some of the after action ruse and near misses that we've come across, is I know this is probably hard for a lot of people that have been around a little bit longer, and I know it was a whole lot of controversy with the chief officers, but the chief officers now are starting to run command from the car. And regardless of what you think about the practice or whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I can tell you that it's definitely improved their ability to hear and communicate and listen to the units, because again, they don't have all that ambient background noise. So that's been chalked up, good, bad, or different, as a success for the communication piece. Now, you could arguably say it's not good for this or that, but considering the communication is one of those five big deals in line of duty death, that's a nice thing to knock out. We're working on training. Part of the OCS class now with new officers has a communication component. I'm going to try to tweak and do some things with this class that hopefully we can get out to the masses and kind of hone in more on the communication piece. A lot of the times now we're doing more official AARs. The one thing that we've done, not just for communication purposes, but for safety related purposes, is the department's formed a SEER group. And that SEER group is composed of, and basically that's a review of every significant event that you feel is significant and or somebody feels significant, whether it's an assault on one of our members or whether it's leads into an AAR or anything to that nature. We as a group, 911 center, police, fire, EMS office, safety office, we have a 911 police dispatch supervisor, we have a fire dispatch supervisor. We literally take the time to review audio, review tapes, review the incident, and see how and if we can make effective change quickly. The nice thing about that group is if there's changes that can be made we have a say to the administration to make changes quicker than not. And it's been a good thing. From a technological standpoint, some of the changes that we made is we went obviously with the APX radios, the P25 radios, and regardless of what you think, that is one of the premier radios in the market. We went with we found that the new remote speakers, the lapel mics, it was testing with the radios and the life packs, that Motorola made some enhancements with that lapel mic. So that was, you know, to Captain Duell, Kevin Duell, and Harpo, Terry Berkrich's credit, and the work that they did with the radios, that was something that came out with a Bluetooth pairing. We have the attention tone, and for those of you that don't know what that is, one of the things that was identified by the chief officers is if I've got to say something important on the radio, the previous practice used to be that I told the dispatcher, and the dispatcher would make the verbal tone or the whatever tone, and then say that message. Now the chief officers can turn on their radio, go to a certain zone and hit a button, and they make a tone. They can create that tone, and then they can speak their message right then and there, and that's not from one to another to another. We had the channel marker, which when you declare a signal 13, we have a tone much like the police does, that every 3 seconds it beeps. It beeps to tell you that there's a problem within that channel. Try not to talk if you don't need to. And the nice thing about it is if somebody's, you know, hit their emergency button and they have a signal 13, that they can trump that channel, they can trump that marker, and they can trump you. So that's been a great thing. We found with the SEER group that sometimes it wasn't activated quickly enough, or it wasn't activated because before they could activate it, the signal 13 was canceled. And then Eric, I think you were talking about this. The one thing that's coming out, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I think it's pretty common knowledge that it's being tested, is now that we have P1, and as any of you were paying attention to what Eric said, it used to be if we went into to practice a true Mayday, we would hit the button and it would set off all kinds of bells and whistles up here at the dispatch center. And it really did limit the amount of training people wanted to do with that, because they were cognizant of the fact that it was interruptive towards the center. The great thing about this now is we have true Mayday portables that are not in the system, and we've taken and made it and created a specific channel that is not on the console up here. So I don't want to say too much because I don't know how much it's gotten out there, but in the future we will be able to take a radio and a group of people, and somebody will be able to use that radio like a true emergency, hit the button, and we can all talk on a specific channel without alerting the bells and whistles up at the dispatch center unless we want to. And if whoever's doing the training wants to, then the ADO consult can change their consult so that only they get the notification and they can play dispatcher on their end, or if a spare dispatcher is around, can sit over there and talk with them. So this is going to change our game immensely in being able to activate a true emergency with ruthless preemption of the channel and us to train on effectively, because everybody's scared to hit the emergency button. So good stuff's coming with that. Do I have any questions, comments, or concerns about that before I move on to concluding?
Yeah, you have one in the chat. It says, can you stations organize tours of 911/dispatch? If so, how?
Yes. So anybody that would like to tour the dispatch center, I strongly encourage it. They're a great group of people. They respect us as much as we respect them. Just email me, ljstewart, STEWART, at baltimorecounty.md.gov, and I will forward that information to Misty Norwitz, and then we'll coordinate that time and that opportunity. If you work with her, she will allow you the time so that your people, depending on the size of the group, can actually sit with a dispatcher, listen to what they're listening to, hear what they hear, and be able to really understand the jobs that they're in. I can promise you, as much as you think we're stressed, there's nothing more stressful sometimes than having to hear these people on the other end of the phone and not be able to physically do anything about it. It really is impressive. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. So in conclusion, we really went over a lot. We went over effective communication. We went over the 911 center overview, what contributes to good effective communication and bad communication. We broke down the components of message delivery. Again, I apologize about the group scenarios. From a time standpoint, I was right on point, but a half an hour for you guys, and we still didn't get to listen to those messages. But again, if anybody wants these slides to listen to, I'll be happy to share them with Ashley. Any other questions?
We have a question just asking if you could add your email into the chat.
I sure can when I get to it. That's the problem. I lost the chat when I actually started sharing
Sorry,
that screen.
I copied that in for you.
Yeah, would you
Sorry.
please? Yep. I really did know technology well until I started doing this, and then I lost these guys again. So any other questions, comments, or concerns? How many people do we still have on?
This is not a question, but I just wanted to thank you for putting this on. Brand new to the fire service and pretty much have no experience, but it was very nice to take in all this information and get a feel for what radio communication will look like. Haven't even taken volunteer weekend yet. I'm registered for it. Have yet to be seated, but it's nice to absorb as much information as possible. So I just wanted to thank you again.
Jack, I do appreciate that. I know it's been a half an hour over, but I'm sitting here talking to you as an EMS captain promoted, and I was a EMS captain down with Eric on the EMS 3, so he knows me as a provider, as a lieutenant, and I never would have thought in a million years I'd be an EMS captain sitting here talking to you about fire communications. More importantly, not being out there in the field in a car, but I really have come to appreciate and love my role here doing this, and I realize the importance of what these men and women do here at the 911 center and how it affects us and vice versa. And I've really just taken an interest in it. So I do appreciate that, because I like being able to share this information with you all.
Likewise.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's interesting. I remember when I first started a long time ago with listening to the radio for the Chase train wreck and all the yelling and screaming going on, and how far we've come since then. And radios are, I don't even think the first person believed what was really talked about as the brief incident wasn't even accepted by the first person arriving at location to the other people until after other people got there and reiterated it. But we've come a long way. Radios are critical to survival. They're critical to success. Communication is critical to success. It spreads knowledge. There's not too much that's more important. I want to thank you very much for today. It was very informative. The talk will be posted on YouTube, and that's it. In the chat, you will find the link if you wish to get the continuing education credit. Please fill it out correctly. Make sure your name matches your number. And that's all I have for it.
Thank you all. Thank you again, Dr. Segal. I'd love to do this again. And if you have anything else you'd like me to teach, I'll be more than happy to help.